Hello, my name is Simon Gilbody and I am the Professor of Psychological Medicine at the University of York and at the Hull York Medical School. And I am a member of a team who have delivered an important study during the COVID pandemic, and we would argue it is one that has been urgently needed by the National Health Service, and the trial is called the BASIL trial. And BASIL stands for Behavioural Activation in Social Isolation, and it's now published in the journal PLOS Medicine, and you can read it for free. And I wanted to say a few words on behalf of the team who delivered the BASIL trial. In order to speak about the BASIL trial, I prepared a series of post-its with some questions that I think are important and it'll be helpful for me, so I remember to cover all the main points. So here's my first post-it. It says, why was this study important? Why did you undertake this research? So, COVID has thrown a spotlight on the issues of loneliness and of mental health. And we've known for some time that social isolation makes people particularly vulnerable to becoming very lonely or developing clinical depression. And this is really bad news, particularly for older people. And COVID and the COVID restrictions have been very disruptive to people's lives, especially people with long-term health problems. And many of those are older people. And this remains an ongoing issue as we emerge from the pandemic. People remain socially isolated and their lives are still very much disrupted compared to before the pandemic. So our question was, can we use a brief, scalable intervention that can be delivered remotely to prevent the onset of depression and the onset of loneliness, particularly in vulnerable populations? So next post-it, what was it that we did in the BASIL study? Well, right at the beginning of the pandemic, we very quickly adapted an intervention called behavioural activation. And we used behavioural activation to tackle the losses of routine, the loss of social contact, and the heightened sense of social isolation that people reported. And we worked with experts by experience to develop a workbook that looked something like this. And alongside this workbook, we offered between 6 and 8 very brief telephone calls to help people to work through the exercises. And in order to test whether this intervention works, we conducted a fair test known as a randomised controlled trial. And the BASIL programme is by some stretch the largest ever trial of a cognitive or behavioural intervention ever undertaken to tackle the problems of loneliness and social isolation. So next post-it, what did we find? Well, these are the first results to emerge from the BASIL programme of research funded by the National Institute for Health Research. And this is a pilot trial of just under 100 people recruited from the NHS. Now, people really liked and engaged with the intervention that I've described. So people really liked the workbook and felt that behavioural activation was a good approach to tackle the problems that they faced during the pandemic. We found that it was easy to train people to give them the confidence to deliver this intervention over the telephone. And we learned a lot about undertaking a trial in the most challenging of circumstances, and that was during the time of COVID. Now, trials are very important in increasing our knowledge about what works, and we have the preliminary results that show a very strong signal of effect in the ability of behavioural activation to reduce the levels of loneliness in this vulnerable population. So now to my final post-it. What does this all mean and what are we going to do next? Well, whilst it is reassuring and interesting that we can deliver a scalable intervention and we have this signal of effect in its ability to reduce the levels of loneliness, we really can't be certain of the impact of behavioural activation until we test that out in a much larger trial. And that large-scale trial, the BASIL Plus trial, is currently underway, and we're recruiting just under 500 people from the National Health Service. I would argue that the need for a brief and scalable intervention to tackle loneliness and depression has not gone away. We think this is an important topic, an under-researched topic. And the final thing I would say is that trials are really important. Trials have helped us advance knowledge during the pandemic about what works and what doesn't. And I think it's really important that we continue to undertake trials to try and mitigate the psychological impacts of the pandemic. And there have been lots of surveys to look at the impacts of the pandemic on the mental health of the population, but the BASIL trial is one of a relatively small number of trials that have been undertaken to mitigate the psychological impacts. So thank you to all my colleagues who've helped deliver the BASIL trial, and the people who helped us with the trial, the people who participated in the BASIL trial. Thank you.